It's an honor to be here today. I have not been out of the great state of Iowa in 595 days up until yesterday, and I wasn't keeping track, but every few months I'd ask Siri, hey Siri, how long has it been since March 10th of 2020? And yesterday she told me 595 was the magic number. So it's great to be out here and see everybody in person and not via Zoom. Today, as Joel mentioned, we're going to talk about the challenges in bringing innovation into the hands of producers who need it to solve the problems that you're talking about. And the key takeaway from our discussion this morning is going to be an adaptation of the proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone, but you might run off a cliff. And if you want to go far, go together. So if you want to remember that key takeaway, that's the main message. This is the token legal disclaimer, just to say that what I'm going to communicate this morning is not legal advice. And we're going to have two main goals. The first being highlight at a high level the challenges in bringing innovation into the hands of producers. And then I'm going to end with some key questions for you to ask during the research process to be sure that innovation can get into the hands of producers as effectively and efficiently as possible. So with that, let's have a hypothetical example. So I didn't want to use pigs. I didn't want to try to call out or have somebody guess about what product or project I was specifically speaking about. So we're going to go hypothetical and talk about the octopus hypotheticalis and an edit that was made to the promoter of the native hAPY gene. And this resulted in unexpected and amazing results. So now what? What do you do once you find this result? And this illustration will be to talk through what some of the challenges are in bringing solutions to producers. So first off, you have to think about what the alternatives may be to solving the problem. And if it's an important problem, rest assured that companies are investing a lot of money and looking at multifaceted solutions to the problem, so that one set of research results is likely not the only thing that can solve that issue. That research program might be number 42 of many, with multiple universities and multiple collaborators trying to all solve the same problem. In addition, there's likely internal research going on and total alternatives, such as the Research Program 51, alien cell culture substitute for octopus meat instead of using the octopus itself, right? And so the next several slides are just a really high-level, 50,000-foot overview of the difference between that innovator mindset and the mindset of the practicality of when you have to bring these innovations into the hand of producers and what that looks like, because they're often just different frameworks. And if you're totally embedded in one, the perspective of the other can seem foreign at times, but it is just the practical nature of the challenges that we're dealing with. So for example, if you're doing research only and you're focused on research, perhaps you're in a university and you have open source access to journal articles and to reagents, and when you go to websites and you look at primer design and you're ordering CRISPRs, all of those things, you don't even think about the challenges long down the pipeline because you have research licenses and you're doing research. So this is very open, and you don't have to concern yourself with what that might mean downstream. Alternatively, on the implementation side, there are licenses that you may need to use gene editing reagents, looking back at our octopus example. And how are you going to get that IP? Will you have to start over once you get IP to those particular gene editing reagents, or can you leverage the exact results coming out of that lab? How much will that cost to get that license? How long is it going to take? So it's just a few examples of the difference in the mindsets when you're working in a research innovator area versus looking at the commercial implementation. Another example is in sharing results and sharing information. So on the innovator side, typically you want to publish. You want to tell the world about this. Look at these amazing results. Look at what this could mean for our industry. Look at the problems that we could solve for producers. On the commercial side, if you're going to make a significant investment in bringing that technology to producers, And if it's regulated, it's going to be a long journey, and you're going to need to make a large investment. You want to back that up with knowing you're going to have a position in the marketplace of being able to bring this to market and secure that with potential patent protection. So you're going to want to be careful about what you share externally, and protect that with patents, and make sure you engage your stakeholders on the messaging. And this isn't necessarily even a matter of trying to curtail disclosure on scientific results. It's often a matter of vocabulary. So the word mutagenesis to scientists, and I was a scientist before I became a lawyer, so I consider myself a geneticist by training. The word mutagenesis is very benign. It's mere mutagenesis. It's not transgenic. But to the lay consumer, mutagenesis is an evil, scary word. No one wants to eat mutant animal protein. And so thinking about how, words that are used, even in research publications or in press releases, is important to people who are bringing innovative products to market. This one is a reflection on patents, and oftentimes I work with scientists who are inventors on a number of different patents, and they say, well, what I did isn't novel, or what they did is obvious, and they would never get a patent on it. And then lo and behold, someone else does. The scientific standards of novelty and obviousness and patentability, thinking about it from those perspectives, are very different from the legal definitions that we use, and those definitions change with case law. So it may not meet the legal criteria, or it may, and you might not have that view. So making sure you have an understanding of what do the results mean from a legally patentable position, whether it's your results or someone else's that you may need. When you find amazing results, the other quick question to ask is, well, this is amazing. Once the world hears about this, all the octopi will be happy. All the octopuses will be happy, right? We'll get this edit in the hands of everyone, and the problem will be solved, game over. But looking at the big picture, 50,000-foot perspective, it could be that this has a commercial financial value of about $3.50 per octopus, but it's going to cost $10 per octopus to bring to market, right? So just the practicality of the cost involved may be a barrier, even though the results were great, which is very disappointing to the scientists who obtain the results. This one is my favorite. A lot of people vilify the FDA when it comes to gene editing in animals. There's a lot, and globally, across plants and animals, there's a lot of writing and discourse and public comment about how it should be regulated, how it shouldn't be regulated, how the framework should be changed. These are very long-term goals that take years to address and to implement. And so whether or not you scientifically agree or disagree with the regulations, they are what they are. And when you're looking to bring these products to market, you have to understand, okay, this is a 5-year plus haul. We have this, we want to get it to producers tomorrow, but just looking at the breeding, the ramp up of the genetics of all of the grandparents, to use the specific porcine example, and great-grandparents that you're going to need that contain these genetics, it takes time. And unfortunately, the regulatory process is not overnight, and we'll get into in a little bit more detail later the global nature of it and how that complicates the picture. So what does this mean? It's a long look play. So to bring these innovative products to market, it's not an overnight view. And companies really have to take a long look view and keep IP and regulatory issues in mind throughout the entire product lifecycle. The one guarantee that I can make is, particularly relating to something that takes a longer time, like a gene-edited product or anything that's going to be regulated, is that the IP framework and the regulatory framework will change on a faster cadence than your product development lifecycle. So you can get all the answers at time point A of what's needed and what's not needed, and that will change over the period of years before you bring the product to producers. So you have to refresh that view periodically. Just we'll look at China and ractopamine as an example, right? So you have to stay abreast of export matters and permits and regulatory changes. And on the patent side, every single Tuesday, a new patent issues, and so that framework can change. Maybe you were doing something with gene editing where you didn't think you needed a certain portfolio of patents, but then something comes out and you realize, we either need to change something or we should probably go take a license to this. So you do need to refresh that view. And then this is interesting for me. So I was a patent attorney before I became a biotech regulatory attorney. And it always made me laugh, the difference between patent law, where you're arguing, this is totally different. No one's ever seen this before. Totally novel, unexpected results, never found in nature, absolutely different. And you've got the data tables to back it up, and you're writing the specification, and you have all the examples of the great problems this is going to solve and how it's never been seen. And then you turn around when it comes to get regulatory approval, and you make the exact counter argument, and you say, there's nothing to see here. This is exactly like normal protein composition. There's no risk, there's nothing unexpected, nothing to see at all. And this can get you into trouble. In fact, a patent was recently invalidated, and the person was cited for inequitable conduct before the US Patent and Trademark Office because of this reason. And they made arguments trying to seek regulatory approval that were counter to everything that they put in the patent, and they did not disclose to the patent office all of the things that they had told the regulators about how this product was exactly the same as what was already out in the market. So be mindful of that as well. So backing it back up to regulatory specifically now for a few minutes. Commodity products move. And so you can get focused on the US-specific regulatory framework, and I'll cover that just in some detail when it comes to animals specifically, and then just overarching how other organisms are treated as well. But when you're dealing with grain or pork or beef, these products are commodities and they move, and there's export markets. And Bill alluded to this earlier this morning when he mentioned they're not going live without Canada and Mexico and Korea and China, right? So that's a list of key export markets from the US for pork. The same thing on the grain side. I was at Pioneer for 14 years. And so it's a house of cards because you need to have this global suite of approvals before you can commercially launch the product in the United States. No company is going to sell, well, okay, one tried, didn't work out so well, but sell seed to a US farmer without that suite of approvals because the elevator will say, what are we going to do with this? Yeah, unless you've already done that go far together and not go alone fast view with your supply chain, the supply chain is going to be a problem if you haven't considered this issue. There's many different types of regulatory approvals. Some are at the research stage and permits needed for transport and disposal. Others are what we typically think of are the commercial market authorization regulatory approvals, both to produce the animals as well as to eat the resultant protein. And every country, as a sovereign nation, has their own laws about this. There's no global harmonization. This has long been the bane of many working in ag biotechnology because it greatly complicates the situation and the timeline and the cost of bringing things to market that are commodity products. So because I am a lawyer, I had to list some kind of statutes and references here. So this is the United States Coordinated Framework for Biotechnology. And under this, all organisms are not treated the same. There are different statutes with different words and different authorities granted to the agency. So the USDA looks at whether something would be a plant pest. And for those of you who follow gene editing and CRISPRs, when the non-browning mushrooms came out, everybody made a big deal. Oh, gene editing isn't regulated in plants in the United States. That's what a lot of the headlines said. However, that wasn't accurate. The FDA still has oversight, And the US EPA, if it's considered a plant-incorporated protectant, still has oversight. And the USDA had been sending out similar letters for years with talons and meganucleases and other enzymes saying, even if we wanted to, basically, there's no indication this would be a plant pest. Our authority is looking at it from a plant pest perspective, so we don't have jurisdiction. It wasn't that there was some grand review where gene editing was found somehow not regulated versus regulated. It was the authority under the statute that the USDA operates under. Similarly, the FDA has statutes that they operate under. They have some enforcement discretion, but they are obligated to review in accordance with that statute unless that gets changed. And the EPA, many people on the plant side tend to forget about, but there's very limited exemptions in place right now for gene editing with the EPA as well. So you really have to, and if you're in the US, you have to think about all three of these agencies if you're working in a regulated product. And then underlying this is NEPA and NEPA requirements, which the agencies will consider, but which companies who are bringing these products to market also need to consider, because it's typically the basis for legal challenges that are made to these approvals. So what is the impact on regulatory approvals? And the fact that we have this, what's referred to as asynchronous approach, where you might have the US approval for 2 years before you get the approval in China. And they don't all come, it is that house of cards that doesn't all come together at the same time. One of the key factors is that stakeholder engagement is very important. As an example, if you can work with your value chain partners, right, and this was done back in the day for ractopamine on the animal side, to say, okay, we're gonna identity preserve this particular technology, we're gonna have it processed in a certain way and keep ourselves out of trouble, and everybody nods their heads and says, yes, agree, processing plants, retailers, that's one way to get the problem solved. If on the other hand, you don't do that and you try to move forward, you can get into a lot of trouble and end up in a situation where it would be similar to Liberty Link rice, where if something gets out where it's not supposed to be, then what may happen, and this is what happened with rice, is that foreign markets will stop buying the commodity. The prices tank, and you end up with a class action lawsuit from the producers against the technology company saying, look, you let stuff get out where it wasn't supposed to be, now no one's buying US rice, what the heck happened, you're on the hook. And it didn't matter that it was likely some university who let this product escape and didn't follow proper practices. What mattered was the genetics came from this one company, they had an obligation to ensure appropriate stewardship, and that didn't happen, so they were on the hook for it. So making sure that you keep those in mind is important. How am I doing on time? Because I see my slides left here. Okay, we're doing good. Did I hit a button that made the slides go away somehow? Nope. Okay. All right. So back to our hAPY edit. So as I mentioned, this is regulated in the United States by the FDA under the FFDCA. And I know this font is very small to read, especially for those of you in the back. This is taken from the FDA has had a few webinars where they go through what these requirements are. And I pulled this particular slide off of one of their webinar slides, and it's available on their website. And there's a reference below here if you want to go watch that and see. But there's a process that they have outlined when you are looking to engage with the FDA relating to gene editing. It's similar to how other agencies operate with technologies. You go in and have a conversation, and then you work through what the requirements are. The FDA does have what's called enforcement discretion, and where they can decide that the risk is so low and the product isn't intended for human consumption, where that whole full suite of data isn't required. And they do this for animals that are intended to be disease models for humans and stay in the lab. They also did this for glowfish, although some would argue, and I've heard that there are apparently some fraternities that have indoctrination rituals that involve potentially eating glowfish, but I don't think that that's documented, and the FDA didn't consider that. So They thought those were ornamental only when they issued that approval. But these steps go through a very defined process from, okay, what they refer to as the intentional genetic alteration that you've made? What is the nature of that? What is your product definition? What phenotype are you trying to implement from the genetic change? And then they look at, what is the impact on animal health and safety, and all the way through the food safety issues, and then the potential environmental issues, and the efficacy. So is there proof that it's stable and inheritable, both genotypically and phenotypically? So there is no recipe book, as there may be more so for vaccines or for crop protection chemicals on the plant side. So it's very hard to scope out how many years and how much it's going to cost to bring these types of products to market, because they really haven't been fully done before. So there's a lot of uncertainty. But we do have a process in place, which is much better than many places in the world where it's still very undefined, and they just have the come talk to us and we'll work through it framework, but they don't have anything more defined in place. So with all of this, and again, this is specific to gene editing, but you can adapt it to other types of regulated technologies. How will the future unfold? And this is just my conjectures based on experience in this area. I think on the FDA side, we're obviously going to see an update to what's referred to as Guidance Document 187, which looks at what those requirements are specifically for gene-edited animals. So that'll be an opportunity, and we'll get more clarity around that as that fleshes out. I do think we're going to see some soft harmonization, I'll call it, of some of the basic data package sets that you'll need for making genetic changes through gene editing in animals. And some of those are going to include, well, did you use a template or did you not use a template? For those who understand the difference there, one would be cutting the genome and letting the cell naturally repair. The other would be inserting a piece of DNA that would tell the cell, this is how I want you to repair yourself with this very particular nucleotide sequence. Sometimes there's a differentiation from a regulatory perspective in how that's treated. Whether you're putting in any foreign DNA that wouldn't exist in the species already, and what the scope of the novelty would be versus genetics that exists naturally. So are you recreating a mutant, but you're doing it in elite germplasm, right? Or are you doing something that's never been done before? I think we're also going to see some clarity on detection methods and what that practically looks like. So a lot of people say, well, gene editing, you can't tell the difference. If it gets out, who cares? Because you would never be able to tell. Every company's genetic footprint from elite germplasm is different, and what's being asked for now is tell us the 5', 3' areas and the intended edit you're making so that we can have a detection method as a precondition to that approval process. So I think this will be important to understand how that works, particularly in animal genetics when we have population genetics and continued breeding that will be taking place. And then I think to really move this forward, PRRS is a great example, African swine fever is a great example, right? It's gonna take that killer app to really drive adoption and bring this forward and help with that harmonization. If we can get one country's approval in place and then go to a different country and say, you've got this problem, and here's how many animals are impacted, and here's this technology, and the review from this agency, consider this as the full package and expedite the review. With appropriate lobbying and engagement and advocacy, there's a real potential to move things along for that purpose. Some of the threats are, there's a lot of talk about what agencies should be looking at this issue. As I mentioned, they're governed by their statutory authorities. So you're either going to be adding an agency, which typically having two government agencies involved in something typically doesn't result in increased efficiency versus only having one. The other issue, when you open up legislation, it's not just open to your proposed changes, right? This is a public debate, a public comment process. Anyone who is opposed to technologies will also be spending money and time and advocacy efforts trying to get this shut down. And so there's a risk when you open up any statute to what you might end up with might not be the goal that you wanted when you asked for that to be opened up and changed. Legal challenges, I'm certain will continue. So the legal challenge on Aqua Bounty's approval, as an example, there is a legal challenge to the USDA's new secure rule for gene-edited plants that's just beginning. And I would fully anticipate that any future approvals that are granted for gene-edited products that are intended for human consumption will be faced with a litigation challenge as well. The agencies know this, and so they want to make the most defensible regulatory approval for you as they can. And companies who are working through this process also understand this. And so some of the questions are, you might argue, well, from a science perspective, why do they need this and why do they need this? But when you look at the way the statute is written and you look at the legal challenges that have been made, the answer is to fulfill the requirements of the statute and to help you prevent a legal challenge where your approval that you thought you had is now overturned for that perceived deficiency. The other issue is, the one rogue actor, and Bill alluded to this as well. Somebody moving forward inappropriately with that go fast, go alone, run off the cliff mentality could derail the whole process of social acceptance, social license, market acceptance. From the perspective of the consumer at the grocery store deciding, am I gonna buy this normal octopus, or do I want the hAPY octopus that has this stuff called DNA in it, and I don't like DNA, I don't want DNA in my food, right? But that is the practical reality of where we find ourselves today as a society. Okay, so now what? What do we do with all these challenges? What do we do with this differentiation and the framework between an innovator mindset and a commercialization mindset? What do we do with the fact that it's asynchronous, going to take years from a regulatory perspective? Well, there's questions that if you ask yourself during the research process, it can help with streamlining bringing that innovation to market, or at least raise awareness of what the issues are so that you have a full awareness of what you're getting into. So now we'll pivot into questions to ask during and throughout the product life cycle to help with some of these things. During research results generation, looking at licensing for those of you who might be in a university where you would want to then work with a licensee to bring those products to market. And then final, market authorization and commercialization. So on the discovery research side, questions to keep in mind. I'm using these research tools, but what restrictions might there be commercially to use these? I worked with one company where they had obtained reagents from one provider, and the MTA actually, they were doing it for research that, it came in a box with this piece of paper got thrown aside, they took out the vial, they used it. When it came time to say, okay, great, now we want to take this forward, the piece of paper, MTA said, you can't use the results to obtain a patent, you can't use the results for regulatory approval, and we as the company have to approve every research publication before it goes out the door. Okay, well, so basically, you either have to choose to ignore that risk, which from a company perspective, if you're publicly traded or you have private investors with a board who wants to weigh in on risk, they're going to be pretty wary about whether they want to do that or not, right? Or you have to get another set of reagents and kind of start over. So ask yourself, what am I doing? What are the commercial alternatives? What would that look like? Is there something you can use or do that would be a lesser burden downstream? If you're using grant money, what are the implications of those grants? Have you been out there talking about this before there's been an opportunity to look at the patents? Did the PI just say, this isn't patentable, I don't need to take it to the tech transfer office and get up and give a talk? Or was there a review made and a provisional patent application that was filed before that disclosure happened? And I see this a lot now, particularly in certain technology areas where on the analytical side, people will pull code out of GitHub, right? Or post their own code on GitHub. But these open source licenses to these analytical tools can sometimes get you into trouble that you don't realize. And GPL3 copyleft licenses that obligate you to then give everything that incorporates that code to that same open source level to the public can get people into trouble too. So be mindful of what you're doing with open source code if you're working on software solutions. On the licensing side, I'll breeze through these fairly quickly since they're more tailored toward PIs at universities, and feel free to catch me later if you want to talk about this more. But these are some questions to keep in mind relating to value sharing. So if you're thinking about licensing this technology, back to that first slide of Project 42 and 2 different universities and an internal research project trying to solve that problem, and then that totally different alien cell culture alternative, right, to animal protein. What are you bringing as the licensor innovator, and what are the alternatives, and what else is out there? Keeping that in mind as you think about how you might license the technology. On the market authorization side, are there unexpected changes that might cause a problem, genotypically or phenotypically? How can you address that? How can you fix that before it goes into the regulatory process? What regulatory process exists today? And in the fine print there, I have, absent personal judgment that the regulations are stupid. Because when I meet with people and agencies, I always like to take the scientists in a room and say, let's all talk about how we don't agree with this, get it all off our chest. But then when we go into the room with the regulators, you don't say any of that. Because that you're a gatekeeper to the market. Today, it's what needs to be done. And if you want to move things forward, that's the reality that you have to deal with. To what extent would global approvals be required, right? What conversations have taken places with the processors, the packers, the retailers, any market studies with consumers? What would the label look like? Now, this is different because what the legal requirements are for you to put on the label is very different than what you should put on the label, because you can rest assured that anyone who is not doing innovation and technology is going to put on that label, non-GMO, free range, had lullabies sung to it at night, hunted for morel mushrooms during the day, everything that they possibly can to gear toward consumers, right? So sometimes it's a matter not of what your label has to say, but what the alternatives may be saying on their labels. And then finally, what is the public sentiment? Excuse me. And existing, what we'll call social license for the technology. Is it that killer app where everybody says, oh my gosh, if this helps prevent African swine fever or some flu that could potentially pivot to a human pathogen, very different from, on the plant side, what Monsanto originally did with Roundup Ready corn and soybeans, where it's a benefit for the producer, but the consumer is left saying, why would I want to accept this risk? What's in it for me? And then the financial benefit versus the cost of bringing the technology to market. So you don't find yourself in that situation where it's a $3.50 value, but it costs $10 per animal to get it there. So with that, I'll look forward to the questions in today's panel. And again, it was an honor to be invited and a pleasure to be here. Thank you.